The honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I suspect that I might have been better at this about 2 hours ago. I feel like I passed my moment. Yeah, sometime around 5:30 in the morning. Thanks. So, I was a journalist for far longer than I have been a politician. And I feel like I want to own a little part of the problem, the predicament that we're in here in Nova Scotia. Because I know as a journalist, and I spent 5 years working for Information Morning on CBC. And before then I was a casual journalist. I worked without having a job to call my own, but I worked for the CBC for about 10 years before I actually had a permanent job. So sometime with Main Street, sometime with Maritime Noon. And frankly, reporting on the results of international or national standardized tests on literacy or math scores is kind of an easy story. And so I remember, I'm not sure which round it was of the program of international student assessment that came out. I'm not sure which government it was, but I remember the story sometime in the 2000s where it turned out our math scores weren't very good. And it was a front page story with all kinds of, it went on for several days. I think, in fact, the first across the country assessment of math scores as part of the Pan-Canadian Assessment Program. I think the first one was 2007. So it might have been that one, or it might have been the follow-up 3 years later. And so I feel like journalists in Nova Scotia, along with many other people, sort of set us up to be searching this holy grail of a score that shows that we're doing well. And I think we followed that holy grail down some incorrect paths, and we're seeing the consequences of that right now in Nova Scotia. And you see that, you hear that from teachers. They have to participate in school improvement plans. The school improvement plans have to have metrics that they can, where they're demonstrating how they're trying to improve, how their performance measures are improving year after year. I was looking, I asked for a copy of the budget estimates and looked at the department budgets. We, according to the estimates, spent $4,500,000 in, or will spend that in 2016, 2017, at the department level for the Centre for Learning Excellence that has responsibilities related to performance management, school improvement planning, research and data analysis, leadership development. And then we spent another just over $1 million on education innovation and another $2,700,000 on innovative curriculum development. And then we spend $400,000 and some on communicating all of this, and the budget of the Office of the Assistant Deputy Minister has gone up $500,000 over the last couple of years. I just added up all those figures, and that is where some other leadership and innovative stuff happens. And so just those figures added up to more than $9 million. And I just kind of guesstimated that was 140 new teachers' salaries or 231 EA salaries that we could invest in people actually working face-to-face with kids, doing what they are trained to do. We actually have 9,000 experts in our system who are our public school teachers. And what they are constantly hearing from us, I think, as a society and from the department as a whole, is what you're doing is not good enough. It has to be better. We have to be improving. But I sort of feel it's a little bit like holding doctors accountable for obesity stats. I mean, there are social determinants of literacy. There are social determinants of how our kids are doing in our schools. And it is not realistic to have, like we just heard at the Human Resources Committee recently, there's an 8% improvement target for literacy goal over 4 years, and a target to close the achievement gap by 5%. And we're in the middle of the pack for national literacy scores in a province where about 30% of children live in poverty. And whereas this government keeps reminding us there are limited resources. So frankly, those 9,000 experts in our system are doing a pretty fine job. One of the things that we heard at the Human Resources Committee is that we had 8 boards and 8 different results in literacy. And that was somehow a problem. That's one of the things that we're trying to address. We don't understand why we have 8 boards and 8 different results. Well, we're people. We're people who live in ecosystems. I think about where I grew up in Newfoundland. And there's like a couple of small schools on the south coast. You have to like get there by ferry, with amazing results in math. And maybe it's like 1 teacher, right? What's wrong with that? Do we need to actually make our system uniform? Who knows? I mean, it's wonderful if you can kind of figure it out. There's stories behind why certain schools are really fantastic and different results, or certain boards are really fantastic. And I might go back to like one person who's worked really, really hard for 40 years and mentored new teachers in that area and shared their lessons. But I'm not so concerned about like standardizing that and then saying, okay, now everybody else do that too. And let's all try to get to the same score and make sure that like we have done as well as, well, I was reading a report by Grant Frost that I can table about some science results where we were right up there with Alberta and Ontario and British Columbia, but the reporting on it was Nova Scotia hits new low plateau because we didn't actually focus on the science results, which were the bulk of the testing results that were released in this particular assessment. Instead, we focused on some incomplete data on math and on literacy, instead of capturing the main story, which is that we were doing as well as British Columbia on science. Do you know what their education budget is, what their population is, what their resources are in comparison to us? And so I think one of the stories, or one of the messages I've been hearing from teachers is that they are feeling like failures, not just because they can't meet the needs of their students, but also because they're constantly falling short of meeting the goals set through this student success planning. And the irony is that we have the best educated cohort of teachers in Nova Scotia history. And we have the best educated cohort of Nova Scotia teachers in Nova Scotia history, and we have left them almost no scope to show leadership. Because we're trying to like uniform it and control it and make sure it's standardized across departments and across boards. So we're not even allowing them to show their leadership in their classrooms. Instead, they're crunching numbers about what they're doing so that we can see if they are doing it the same as everybody else, so that we can, figure out at the end of the day whose test score is improving and why, and try to make that standardized. Well, it's not a sausage factory. And Finland, which I love how so many Nova Scotians have learned about Finland in the course of the last 3 months. There's a couple of really obvious contrasts between what we're doing and what they do. One is that they start their public education system when kids are 7 years old. We're bringing 4-year-olds into classrooms that are not play-based and asking them to sit at desks and start working on their math skills and their reading skills and their writing skills. It's not fun. I'm sorry, I'm tired. My son, for the first 3 months that he was in school last fall, because he's in grade 1 now, for the first 3 months, every day, he asked if he could go back to preschool. Because he got to play. So that's one difference from Finland. The other is that teachers are well-trained and respected and allowed to lead. You don't get somebody to go to school for as long as we get our teachers to go to school and then say, don't do your own thing. Don't shine in your classroom. Don't innovate in the way that you think makes sense given the kids that you're in front of. Thank you. That's just like a really, really poor investment. And we've made them invest so much in their post-secondary education, and we've invested so much in the post-secondary education of our teachers. So why aren't we actually taking advantage of that? And why aren't we valuing what they can actually bring to the classroom? So I think it's a real, I think it's a real tragedy that we have teachers feeling like failures. And I think it's been phenomenal to watch the conversation open up. And teachers have told me how liberating it is to actually be honest about how they're feeling like failures, how they're being made to feel like failures, instead of constantly trying to paper over the system that has real cracks in it. So if we weren't going to invest all the time in student success planning and constant innovation, or if we were just to allow innovation to happen in classrooms in a supportive way so that teachers could, try different things with curriculum and then try to share it through naturally forming professional support groups or whatever it is that right now are mandated. If we weren't going to invest in that and in so much data analysis, where could we actually put investment that we know would make it a big difference and a longer term one? Well, again, when the deputy minister and a number of her senior staff appeared at the Human Resources Committee, I asked the question about the EDI, that's the Early Development Index, or instrument, sorry, which is a very widely accepted, very rigorous assessment of children's readiness to learn that you'd take between 3.5 and 6 years old. And And if there's one metric, if there's one number that we should actually be focused on trying to shift, it's not literacy or math in grade 6 or math in grade 9. It's the EDI. Because it's a huge indicator for how kids will do throughout their school career and on into the future. It correlates with what kind of experiences they'll have in the healthcare system, what kind of experiences they'll have in the justice system. Because it's hugely related to how well they're being nurtured in their early childhood. And one of the comments I found just really telling in that Human Resources Committee meeting is that we were told that the department is looking at doing an 18-month check and a 36-month check to make sure children get early referrals. They're looking at that. We're not doing it. It is super important. And again, that's one of the frustrations you hear from teachers is that right now, there's all this data that is collected and almost no action to actually help the kids that we can see are failing. And partly it's because we're gathering the data on a system-wide level too late. If we actually caught them at 18 months or 24 months or 36 months and referred them to resources then, you've got a whole education career that you can shift. And there's all kinds of really fun and innovative and effective ways of doing assessment at those early levels. Right now, I can tell you, because I just went through the experience of having kids, I saw my doctor, who's fabulous, thank God, at a wonderful clinic. I saw her or one of her colleagues so frequently from like birth until 6 months, and then still quite a lot all the way up until 18 months. And then at 18 months, she didn't see my kids again until they had to get their preschool check, like until they had to get their vaccine before they went into school. Between 18 months and and maybe 52 months, we barely see our kids in Nova Scotia. No, there's no systemic check. And you can be doing all kinds of great stuff with having a doctor go in and actually use a board book at 36 months. If you pass a board book to a kid at 36 months and they can't hold it in their hands, they don't know to orient it the right way so that they can flip through the pages. If they're not doing that naturally at 36 months, you know that they're not being exposed to books, and you know that family needs to have some support in the home. And there are great programs. There are great programs in the community, some of which the Department of Community Services is investing in, like Parenting Journey, but they're not getting us at a population-wide level. They happen, if somebody refers themselves, it happens. Or if somebody's already in contact with the Family Resource Center, they might get the Parenting Journey program. But there's a lot that we could do at that early level, which could make a real difference. In terms of this actual legislation, I'm quite stumped by some of it. The Commission on Inclusive Education is to be comprised of 3 experts on inclusive education, not one of which can be a member of the union. That means you have nobody from our education system who can be part of that Commission on Inclusive Education. I think we've all had the experience of having somebody come in and tell us, or at least I've had that experience of having like a wonderful expert come in and tell me, how to do my job better, and except they have no idea how my job is now, or like the context, because they're just from too far away from the system. And so they're like, it's like, yeah, that would be great, but you don't know this and this and this. And this, so this Commission on Inclusive Education is going to be made up of 3 individuals who are experts on inclusive education, none of whom will have deep knowledge of where we're at now and what kind of situation teachers are working in now. And they're supposed to do their job incredibly fast. And I just don't see how that can work. I just don't see it. And that's apart from the fact that the fact that we're here at all is really a result of relationships not having been nurtured, and the collective bargaining process having happened under conditions that are actually not conducive to collective bargaining. And many of my fellow members have shared quotes that I couldn't agree with more about how collective bargaining has to happen with equal power, where parties get to come to the table with equal power, and that process has evolved over time so that employees and the employer are meeting in the middle. And the Premier can say it as many times as he likes, that the government of Nova Scotia has negotiated 3 tentative agreements with teachers, with their union, and 3 times the executive recommended acceptance. Except I've heard the stories from the negotiators who were there for the first one and were shocked, literally quite shocked, when they showed up for the first negotiating session after the initial exchange of starting positions, and they were greeted not with a negotiating team, but with a manila envelope that was the government's final offer. That is not collective bargaining. Saying that we can't actually talk is not bargaining. The Shelley Morris, who was then the president of the Nova Scotia Teachers Union, said, and in a 2-page communication to the membership that was emailed out to union members a week and a half ago, that, quote, in the face of impending draconian legislation, it was decided to recommend acceptance of this offer. In the face of impending draconian legislation. And then the next one happened under Bill 148, which, yes, hasn't been actually proclaimed, but everybody knows that it could be. It signals the government's intent. And frankly, I think by the time the 3rd deal was negotiated, teachers just felt so disrespected. And why the Minister of Education would say that she thought teachers were looking forward to getting back to the classroom when they had never been out of the classroom, as teachers are going to vote on that offer. I really think that the government, I do know teachers who were hoping that somehow people would accept it, that they would hold their nose and accept it, just because it's been long, and because so many people are, teachers who aren't completely exhausted do love their jobs and love the kids that they work for, and so they were hoping that, we're not going to get anything better, so let's just make this stop so that we can go back to normal. That wasn't any good, but let me go back get back at it. But then that comment and the Premier's comment about, you know, what the intention of those 2 days was, I think that really really scuttled any chances of even getting a very lukewarm approval. And maybe there never was a chance at all. So yeah, I have 2 kids in the public education system. And I think about them and how different they are, and I think about our focus on these math scores and literacy scores. And I just think about everything that we're not measuring and how I really would rather sort of that we don't focus so much on measuring. I doubt that my 8-year-old daughter is meeting the expected outcomes for reading. But she blows me away with her creativity. I have worn jewelry in the legislature that she has made. I have more art than I can figure out how to get up on the wall. She can speak to strangers. She can speak in front of a crowd with complete confidence. She has such great questions. She has a really, she has an understanding of human emotion and is able to name her own emotions and what's causing them and why she's feeling like that at 8 in a way that I couldn't do in my 20s. I mean, she's going to be fine. She's going to be just fine. And it's taken her a while to learn how to read. And I can see already that her brother is going to be at the end of grade 1 where she was at the beginning of grade 3. And I'm not going to hold the teacher accountable for that. And I know we're not holding teachers accountable for individual students. And I know that there's a range of population. But we do sort of act like they're widgets. And what we're trying to build in Nova Scotia is a better widget factory where we get these particular metrics of math scores and literacy scores. And really we have to worry about, do we have flourishing individuals? Do we have individuals who feel connected? Do we have individuals who have, there's all this really fascinating stuff about early experiences and how it shapes people's lives. And you may have heard reporting about the ACE scores. ACE.
Order.
Sorry.
I just asked that the member speak directly to myself and not to the members opposite. Thank you.
ACE scores. ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And the first large study of this was based on HMO data in the States. So the sample set was, of people who have insurance, largely, a disproportionately white, disproportionately male population group. But because they had this amazing sample set, they were able to trace individuals reporting of these adverse childhood experiences and look at them and their health outcomes. And adverse childhood experiences include everything from, abandonment of a child by a parent, sexual abuse, adverse poverty, neglect. There's 12 or 16 of them. But the amazing thing is, and if you have one adverse childhood experience, you're going to be okay. But then when you get up to 4 or 5, and unfortunately we do have children in our society and in our world who are having, one adverse childhood experience often comes with others. But one adult, Mr. Speaker, if a child has one adult consistently in their life who they trust and who they can turn to, it is protective of those eventual outcomes that would otherwise be predicted for somebody who had those experiences. And for some kids, those individuals are teachers. If they're in small schools and you've got a principal who is like your person who you can check in with, or you've got a guidance counselor who's with you for years, or you've got a grandmother, or you've got an aunt, or you've got a really awesome next door neighbor, but somebody who sticks with you long enough, that person is enough to protect that child from what otherwise are higher incidences of diabetes, of heart disease, of mental illness. So really what we have to be working on as a society is like, how do we actually help people thrive? And the metric of that is much, much broader than what we're currently measuring. And unfortunately, what you measure tends to be what you go for. So right now we're going for what we're measuring, and we're measuring this like little narrow thing. And then we're telling teachers, sorry, you're not doing good enough. Let's like get on that school improvement plan. Let's hit those metrics and those targets that we've set for goals to improve. But they are not the ones who are determining the level of, they're not the ones who are creating the poverty that children are living in. They're not the ones who are, like teachers are already trying to do so much to often make up for the childhood circumstances of the kids in their classrooms. And then we're blaming them or holding them accountable if they can't work miracles. So I think that's deeply unfair to our teachers. I think the rejection of these agreements reflects that unfairness. And I think that is, and I think we need a reset. I think we desperately need a reset. And frankly, if this government wanted to, teachers have told us how to do it. Teachers have told us, these are things that you could do that don't cost any money. Just do them and then walk away and let's just cool off for a while. Instead, it's like, no, we're doing the opposite of that. We're not cooling off. We're not creating an environment where there's some good faith. We're not offering an olive branch. Instead, there is this bill which is imposing a collective agreement that teachers have rejected and studying the problems. And teachers are really tired of studying the problems. They want to see something alleviated. And so I'm not surprised at the protests outside. And frankly, it's an honor and a privilege to stand up and voice my appreciation for teachers who do feel underappreciated, and also really voice my opinion that there's nothing more important than this. There's nothing more important than our public education system, and to which I would add our early education system, which we don't really have. We don't really have yet in Nova Scotia. We have a system of private and nonprofit daycares and preschools, which are all really struggling under other changes that this government has made without sufficient consultation. And I'm afraid that we may lose some of those. And I'm sure that some of you have probably heard from both nonprofit and private operators of daycares and childcare centers in your district. So that's a topic for another day. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will take my seat.